they had an opportunity to take it through. Sasa, they were asking me if they can bring on board. Of course, that's the idea, to bring many people ili tuweze kufanikisha ile social audit. So we'll be meeting them in the course of the month to discuss further.
Wako na app ingine nzuri inaitwa uwajibikaji.
Precisely because of that app. Ndio wanasema kwa sababu if they tell me to do it,
we are live. Morning. We are live. Channel 1, eh?
So precisely because of that, that's why it's project site.
Okay.
So you can
Channel 1.
say what to
Number 1.
yeah, put the project site from so simple to social accountability.
Mic check. Unanisikia sema? Sawa. Let's do this. Ambia team I'm live. Hiyo kamera iko. Yeah, it's camera 1 or 2. So you want signal haikuji. Nitie team kidogo. Hata tuko sioni. Code. Asha, icon. Icon. Asha. Civic program ni
Good morning. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Hello.
Hello.
Will you be upstanding? Kindly be upstanding. I'm disrupting your sitting so that you can look at me. Let's be upstanding.
Mbona kuna image zinakuja huko?
This is a disruption. Those people are not standing are not listening. But if you are standing, you are fine.
Sound iko.
Thank you. We welcome you to this second day of the convention, in which we are discussing the contestation of civic space in the context of a constitutional democracy. We have a constitutional democracy in Kenya.
Okay, so focus
Anyway,
fully. Focus
that's
fully.
what we're doing. So, naomba tufanye vitu mbili. Kwanza, give our mapambano kuile, alafu now we'll give ourselves a new direction. Okay? Sasa moderator kita Mungu aliko.
Anza.
Content. This is the content of the moderator. So, who wants to lead us in give our mapambano?
Yes, you're very clear. Thank you. So make sure una focus. Mtoa sign language anaweza kaa tu chini.
Timu na project.
So thank you. Wewe uko poa. Yeah.
Projector. Ni sawa. Projector iko on kwa hiyo.
Kwa maisha hatutatuzuia sisi wananchi. Toa hiyo please. Toa hiyo.
Shatoa.
Toa hiyo.
Shatoa.
Why is it the slide, right? It's so interesting. Oh, dear. Yeah.
Sasa tunachofahamu Edison
Ishazi.
again project the
Bwana kupokonya maisha, hatutatuzuia sisi wananchi. Unyakuwa huru. Tumekataa kupiga magoti mbele ya wauaji. Bila shaka sisi pia ni watu, hali ya utumwa tumeikataa, hali ya utumwa tumeikataa. Tanyakua mashamba yetu, tupiganie uhuru wetu, tuikomboe elimu yetu, utamaduni na viwanda vyetu. Tukomboe utamaduni na viwanda vyetu. Sisi hatutaki kudhulumiwa, hatutaki tena mauaji.
ili kupetuliangushe haki na uhuru sichanue haki na uhuru sichanue uhuru wetu wa Kenya uhuru wetu wa Kenya tupiganie na haki zetu wa Kenya na haki zetu wa Kenya tupiganie katiba yetu wa Kenya katiba yetu wa Kenya tutekeleze.
Yeah.
Ikifika hapo now you feel like going to the streets.
But we can sing another song before we continue. Okay, good. Haya, 20. No. Twende hapa. Tunataka twende.
Haya. Hiya Yahweh.
Hiya ya 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 ya.
Hiya Yahweh.
Hiya ya 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 ya.
Hiya Yahweh.
Hiya ya 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 ya.
Hiya Yahweh.
Hiya ya 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 ya.
Dhuluma webaki nyuma sitaenda na haki. Dhuluma kwenda
webaki nyuma sitaenda na haki.
Polisi
webaki nyuma sitaenda na haki.
Polisi
webaki nyuma sitaenda na haki.
na wizi
webaki nyuma sitaenda
na haki. Na wizi
webaki nyuma sitaenda na haki.
Simama, 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 simama imara. Simama we,
simama, simama, simama imara.
Simama we,
simama, simama, simama imara.
Simama,
simama, simama, simama imara.
Pamoja, 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 pamoja twashinda. Pamoja, 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 pamoja twashinda. Hello.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The chair of CFF, Davis Malombe, hata kama sauti si nzuri sana. Sikuwa nataka mseme, nilikuwa nataka mimi niseme ndio asione kama tunamuonea. Lakini he's done very well. So we are in for the second day of the convention, and I would like to ask, we want to have two concurrent activities. The CFF board members, if you are here, and Caleb will join you, and where is Sheila? And Sheila will join them. They have an activity out here. And in here, I would like to ask one of those board members, because if you look at your program, this morning, and we are starting late by 32 minutes and 40 seconds. Yeah. The CFF board. Changwani, you are still here. You are being called outside. So I would like to invite the moderator for session 4, which is talking about regulation of civil society sector, the rough road ahead, or is it a smooth road ahead? Chris Mbiti of Pen Kenya to come here, and so that you can get to your panel and proceed with the session. We'll have this session, and then we will have, we'll continue for the day. Chris, I want to welcome you.
Thank you very much, Wambuaka Weaver. Good morning. I think this is our first session of the day, although we are quite late, but I think we'll catch up by first reducing the session from 2 hours to 1 hour and a half. So I would like to call my panelists, and we are going to talk about the regulation of civil society sector, and this is about the PBO Act 2013, sorry. I don't know how I was saying 2023, since because it was commenced 2023. It has been a long journey, and I'm sure there are a number of colleagues who have worked with us since 2009. And the two people who are going to speak today have been that journey for a very long time. From the PBO Authority, we are going to have Mr. Lyndon Otieno, who is going to talk about the PBO Regulation Authority and preparedness, and how are we prepared to ensure the law is implemented within the spirit. Yeah. No. Yeah. Yeah, I think we can bring these ones around there. Or they can speak from here, then they can be seated there. No problem. Okay? So one of the speakers will be Lyndon Otieno, who is the acting executive director of the PBO Authority. He has been in this journey for a number of years, even during the inception of the discussions, and he has seen both that time the NGO board and the civil society sector work together to ensure that the law has been commenced by the CS as it was anticipated in the law. Then the other person who will be speaking will be Faith Kisinga. Faith Kisinga has been in this journey from the same time, that time actually working with ACT, and also as an independent consultant, and also currently working with ICNL. She'll be speaking to the same law, and she'll be talking about how can the sector itself regulate itself, promote accountability, and we'll be talking about the PBO Federation. And she'll also be trying to see what are the best options of actually solving the problem we have with the NGO Council. How many councils are there? How many are there? Kuna moja ya Chemboi, kuna ingine ya nani? We actually know them by the persons who lead them. Okay, there are quite a number of them, isn't it? So how can we avoid the same problems now we are currently facing at the NGO councils? Now, they are supposed to transit to federations, but which one should we transit at the moment? She will also be talking about the networks at the counties and see how can we promote regulation within ourselves, how can we promote accountability, and how can we serve the citizens better. Then the final speaker will be Mr. Justus Masebe. Where is he? Yeah, Justus will be speaking specifically about Schedule 2 of the law. If you look at the benefits of registering as a PBO, there are some benefits around the issue of taxation, issues of donations. He will be telling us how can we prepare for that, and what is expected of us, and what are most possible challenges. So I will call upon the panelists to come huku juu kidogo tafadhali. I will start with Mr. Linton, please. Oh, you need... where are these young men of IT? Who can help us with the projection? Faith. Can speak in that, gentleman. Okay. Yeah. So that will be organized. Then Justus, please. We will start with Faith, and then we'll go to Justus, then Linton will speak last, because we'll be speaking about how prepared are we and the road ahead, and what are some of the milestones we expect maybe in the next 3-6 months. Because we are supposed to transit to the new law May 2025, all of us, isn't it? Because we are given only 1 year, if I'm not wrong. But I think the team will clarify that. Can we project for Faith, please? Is it working? So this is how we'll do it. Each one of them will speak for about 20 minutes. Then we'll hold our questions. Then we'll use the next 30 minutes to ask the questions in the plenary and for the panelists to respond, okay? So I'll start with Faith.
So anyway, as we figure it out, I'm really glad to be here today and to be looking at the self-regulatory, I'd say, scene or space. We've been talking about it quite a lot, especially as civil society, in terms of how do we get prepared for implementing the PBO Act. And quite a number of you have already tried to look at how to internally ensure that you have codes that you're able to implement at the internal organizational level. So just to begin by saying that Kenya is not really new to self-regulation. If anything, we actually set the pace and are trailblazers, recognized even continentally, because in 1990, for the first time ever in Africa, we were the first country that actually was able to incorporate self-regulation within our law, that is the NGO Act. And so this was very unique, and it was actually the first time in Commonwealth Africa, and perhaps actually in Africa in general, and outside of professional organizations, talking about organizations such as law societies, medical and accountant professions, that a government had allowed or expressly given power to NGOs to incorporate self-regulation within the law. So this is not a new thing, and what my challenge to us here is that having set the pace so high and having started at such a great note, it's really incumbent upon us to continue ensuring that we continue with that pace-setting legacy, and that we are able to ensure that even now through what is provided in the PBO Act, that we are able to continue setting that pace. Okay, thanks. So the other thing I wanted to say is that even as we are now on the other side of the commencement of the PBO Act, these conversations have been going on for a very long time. And just to recognize that at least civil society has recognized that it is important to ensure that we are credible, transparent, and accountable organizations, that this is a very fundamental issue that really goes to the core of our existence. The importance of these core values have actually been the backdrop of a lot of the discussions that have been had over the years, ever since 1990, from the time the Code of Conduct was actually developed by the NGO Council, all the way until now, where you look at our PBO Act. And one thing that is very unique about the PBO Act, you will notice, is that it's reference to a lot of issues to do with principles. These are the core values that PBOs or NGOs have felt really reflect how we want to conduct ourselves and how we want to engage with other partners. And so that continual reference to values and principles, all the way from the preamble, all the way to Section 27, which has a whole list of principles. And these are not just theoretical ideals, but these are really clear standards, or issues that point to how we want to practically conduct ourselves. And what it is telling NGOs, PBOs to do is take these things up, come up with codes within your own organizations or within your self-regulatory frameworks or forums that can then ensure that you follow these up or that you uphold these values. So these core values actually also guided the development of the PBO Act, in that before the PBO Act was developed, a group of people sat together and said, what are the core things that we really feel are the minimums that need to be reflected in this act? And they came up with about 8 issues, and 2 of them I'm going to refer to today were transparency and accountability. It was acknowledged that we have a huge problem with accountability and transparency in the sector. And the second one was the issue of self-regulation. People felt we need to really sort this issue out. It's not going away. And unless we sort it out, we'll continue to lose credibility in the public sector. Public trust is actually the key asset that we have as civil society. And it was also acknowledged that some of the standards we keep holding private sector and government to are the same ones we also need to be held accountable for. But if for us we lose public trust, we basically, the implication or the impact is going to be sector-wide. And so that acknowledgement that unless we do something about it, we'll lose the only key asset that we have. Okay. As the discussions went on to the development of the PBO Act, the key thing that was felt, especially around self-regulation, was that we need to decide, do we continue with this NGO council the way it is in the Act? Has it served us well? If not, what are the key loopholes that we need to fill? And if it has, or it's weak, how do we strengthen some of those weaknesses? And so they came up with 2 options. And one of them was, let's see whether we can work with, number 1, strengthening the council. And that would mean we strengthen what it had called the regulatory committee, ensure that it had procedures for being able to conduct its work. And then let's see how we can ensure compliance with the code of conduct. But at some point, the discussions were clear. We really do not want to go the way of having an NGO council legislated or provided for within the Act. Because what had happened is that it had been politicized and infiltrated. And at some point, people were clear that it was no longer serving the interests of the sector. The council eventually split into quite a number of factions. And what was happening at that same time was that the professionalism of the sector actually took a dip. We no longer were having standards being enforced. Leadership wrangles were the order of the day. I mean, it was always on the news about the leadership wrangles taking place. The image of the sector was really in jeopardy. And so the discussions were definitely always ongoing about what can we do about our public image. It's not looking good at all. So the second option was then, if we do not want to have a body that is legislated for, can we then allow self-regulatory bodies, voluntary self-regulatory bodies set up by NGOs and doing the work of ensuring self-regulation? Please just go back. Okay. So that is now what we have in our act. Actually, it is compromise of having the two options, but with the caution that we really need to ensure that even though there has been provided for a federation, this is not a compulsory body. What its task is really to provide a mechanism for coordination of self-regulation in the sector. But really, each and every one of these self-regulatory forums is a distinct and recognized body on its own, such that it will receive the support it needs in terms of the authorities at the regulatory authority. And then just to note that when we talk about regulation and self-regulation, most of the time people say, can we do one without the other? But just to note that both of them are complementary. And when you have a system that has both of them, you have a really robust system for ensuring transparency and accountability. Each of them has its own unique function. That of, for example, regulation is created by the state, and it consists of statutes and statutory instruments. Then we have CSO, self-regulation, which is definitely produced by CSOs themselves, and they do it voluntarily. So let us move on to the next. I wanted to quickly point out that when you look at our act, the PBO Act, one of the things that it has done is to ensure that the standards that are expected in terms of self-regulation are well captured within the Act. One of the standards is, for example, the international standards, is that the law should not require membership in any specific umbrella organization. And this is also, it's also very well captured in the Constitution, that every person has that right to freedom of association and shall not be compelled to join an association of any kind. So really that reflection that joining an association is a voluntary act which ensures that we are actually respecting the freedom of association. So the act actually reflects that. Next slide, please. Sorry. So the other standard best practice is that CSOs should be encouraged to set their own standards of conduct through voluntary self-regulation. And the Act in section 28(1) actually provides that PBOs will actually be encouraged by the authority to develop their own codes of conduct and to ensure that these are enforced within their organizations. Section 27, again, I mentioned, has a list of principles which are really supposed to be for our reflection as organizations, within our organizations or as a sector, about how we want to uphold them in our day-to-day conduct. Next slide, please. So the other one, again, is that umbrella organizations should be encouraged to adopt codes of conduct. And that is, again, reflected in section 25. And the last standard, which is clearly reflected, next slide, please, in the Act, is that the law should permit umbrella organizations to be set up and to adopt their own standards in the codes of conduct, and they can actually organize themselves into networks that will actually enforce these standards. So all I'm saying is that in all, we have clearly incorporated international standards of self-regulation within the PBO Act. And it's best for us now to sit down and decide how we will be able to ensure that these come to life in our day-to-day conduct. Let's move on to the next, please. So I just want to take you through at the timeline of the work that has been done over time as far as regulations, CSO regulation is concerned. But behind it all, the main message I want to share with you is this, that it is not lost to the CSO sector that we have a problem when it comes to accountability and transparency and management of the sector. And that's why we've been having these conversations for the longest time. And it is not because of fear of constraining regulation. That is not what drives our discussions about self-regulation. It is actually from our own acknowledgement that we ourselves feel that we need to get our houses in order. And we need to ensure that that is done so that we can retain public trust that is so important to us. The other thing I also want to point out, even as I go through this timeline, is that one of the things that has constrained efforts to uphold self-regulation has been political agendas. When those have been laced with ideas of coming up with laws or amendments to laws, they have that fear that the sector will actually be soon facing impending constraints, have actually also affected their efforts to promote self-regulation. So one of the best things then we can say is that when we have an enabling legal framework and an enabling institutional framework, that also helps the sector to promote and implement self-regulation. So maybe we can quickly go down the timeline. We had the NGO Coordination Act in 1990, which actually provided for self-regulation, and the Code of Conduct was developed by the Council in 95. But in 2004 to 2007, the sector faced an identity crisis. We lost a lot of our key leaders, and then there were allegations of political interference in the council. And then, of course, at around the same time, there were many factions in the council. And as a corollary, the factions were also appearing all over the sector. And so this led to the public image being dented. Next. Around 2007, Poverty Eradication Network, as it was then, conducted a study looking at CSO competence and sustainability. And one of the things that was beginning to become clear is that we have a huge problem in the sector and we need to really address it. And unless we do that, we are actually headed into the whirlwinds. And so this study actually became the backdrop of discussions about what can we practically do. And so eventually it led to the need to come up with self-regulation standards that will actually guide the sector, and then a body or a mechanism for ensuring compliance with those standards. And that is where Viwango was born. 2010, we have the Constitution with the enabling provisions around freedom of association, and again, continuing discussions about, okay, now with the Constitution, how can we also ensure that we bring to life some of those Bill of Rights provisions through the PBO Act? And so 2010 to 2012, a lot of consultations across the sector, talking about issues of how do we as a sector want to continue to be seen by the public? How do we want to conduct ourselves? How can we reflect that in the Act? And so 2010 to 2012, was that period of a lot of consultations. The next, eventually the act was signed into law. And all this time, I think the hope was that with an enabling law at the backdrop, then we will also be able to see self-regulation becoming alive and being implemented. However, we know the story. The PBO Act was not operationalized immediately after it was passed. Then there was uncertainty regarding the regulations. And this also cast a lot of uncertainty in terms of how do we move forward? There are provisions in the Act that talk about self-regulation. So if now we're talking about self-regulation, how do we really go about it? And we do not have the enabling law to be able to implement it. Then next. We are also beginning to see at around this time, this is, I think 2016, 2015 and onwards, limited uptake of Viwango, but also because of capacity issues, they were relying a lot on peer reviews. And as a result, so all those efforts now are also going downhill. Then within that period of October 2013 to May 2015, there was a slew of amendments from that were being tabled that aimed to amend the PBO Act. So of course the sector was reeling with the fear of what is coming now. They couldn't concentrate anymore on self-regulation efforts or initiatives, just to see that that dive in self-regulation coincided with that rise in efforts to constrain the sector through regulation. So you actually need an enabling law and to be able to ensure that self-regulation is also strengthened, or that people feel confident to move forward with their self-regulation efforts. But still, there was another attempt in March 2014, where the CSO sector championed the PBO Voluntary Service Charter in an attempt to see what is it in the law that we can still be able to implement, even though the law has not been commenced. And yeah, just as we finish this slide, yeah, things were really, the NGO council had already split into multiple factions. And yeah, that is the situation that we saw ourselves in. There were many court orders trying to verify which is the real council, which one had legitimacy. And so the whole self-regulation discussion has really been around how do we avoid some of the mistakes that we made in the past? How do we ensure that now, even as we're moving forward, we take recognition of those mistakes we made and we avoid falling into them again? So right now, today, we are, of course, at the commencement. We are now moving forward. The discussions have become revamped again. We had hoped that by the time the Act will have been commenced, we will already have some semblance of self-regulation mechanisms running on the ground. But of course, these have been deflated by some of the political agendas that aimed to constrain the sector, especially through regulation. So can we just finish? I just want to share some of the key things, even as we're having we have discussions later on moving forward, in terms of what are the key things we need to have when we are looking at developing self-regulation mechanisms. Voluntary participation of the whole sector in developing those norms and standards is very important, which will ensure that there is buy-in. And then also looking at how to ensure that we have a diverse group of organizations, and how do we cater for all the different organizations, the small ones, the large ones, because not all of them have the capacity to be able to implement maybe even some of the expectations, but how do we also ensure that we are building the capacities of all organizations as we move along? So the last one is that to ensure that this is going to be a process of continuous learning, and incorporating that into the mechanism is what will ensure its sustainability. Working in networks will facilitate and encourage mutual learning and problem solving, so that as we are learning, we're able to then take into account what it is we need to change, what it is we need to improve. And this learning can be done, we can share the learning not only within the sector, but also with the regulator, but also with other peers in the continent or in the region, so that we are all able to benefit from what we are learning as we move along. And last, as I end, is just to say that this mechanism of self-regulation should not be a gatekeeping instrument which becomes exclusionary, but it should be one that is open to reflection, evaluation, and change over time, an educational and capacity building process for all those who are concerned. So if we open our minds to that's the reality, that is how we're going to view it, then we'll be able to keep improving over time. And we avoid the problem of being captured for political and other agendas and shenanigans. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Faith. And you have given us taxation. How many of us have had trouble with taxation? How many of us have ever received a letter from KRA? How many of us have got tax exemption certificate? Okay. How many of us know how to apply for it? Irungu knows, but he has never applied for it. Oh, you have it? Oh, that's good. So, Justice will be speaking to us. What the law means now. Because the PPO Act clearly states the benefit of registering as a PPO. And there are some tax incentives. Right? So let's hear what are some of these tax incentives and how do we go about it, and what are the challenges when it comes to the care. Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Justice.
Thank you. Good morning. The 20 minutes we've been given, we have split them into two. I will take the first 5 minutes, and my colleague will take the remainder and bring you to speed. Yesterday, I happened to attend part of the sessions that we had, and I heard one of the speakers say, besides the police being sent and put a circle around his operations, he feared that the government will also use KRA. And I was asking myself, why KRA? Why will the government use KRA? Then I had an answer. I don't know if it is the correct answer or not. And the answer I came up with, it means maybe, as we are seated here as groups defending various rights, but also we are seated here as taxpayers, right? So whereas we are looking at how the police are very brutal, how the constitution is being mutilated, we also need to ask ourselves then, how compliant are we? Right? Such that of the many accusations that are coming, of the many things, at least say KRA is not one of them. Right? you'll be taken into task for picketing, maybe. But who will take you to task for being compliant? So I think before we go into the main thing, let us first of all put ourselves in the hands of taxpayers. Besides being a civil society, we are taxpayers first. And then, what are the levels of our compliance? Number two, as we are pushing for this, could we also think of other things that are affecting us, either directly or indirectly, so that we put them in the course of our push for better Kenya? For example, currently, I believe you are aware that the Kenya Revenue Authority has decided to bring all the information since inception, or since you started operations, and they're saying bring everything to current, bring everything to iTax. Have you encountered such a thing? You apply for compliance, you're told you have a debt that in 1998, in July, information before us tells us that you did not pay your pay as you earn. So, you cannot be able to get your compliance. Or, we cannot consider your exemption until this is completed. But because you have not trained yourself to that area, you'll say now this government went. The only question I'm asking is how many years are you required to keep your records? I don't know. How many years? So what happens if you're asked to pay, for example, 10 million for liabilities that are historical? What are you doing in your space to ensure that the right thing is done? Because if you don't have a record for 20 years and KRA says you have this debt, what will you do? Will you advise us to pay? Will you say the government is after you? What will you do? Sorry? You will say the government is after you. Why can't we use this space then to avoid saying the government is after me? Why can't we push then that we have proper structures from the other side so that such liabilities, and remember, unlike iTax, those days, it is KRA who was inputting all this data into the system. Your work was to take the record, then they feed it into the what? Into the system. Currently, you're the one who is doing this yourself. Is there a way then we can tell the government to go slow? We had a session of waiver. Maybe some of us took advantage of it, but we are hoping from the information we have that maybe, or maybe not, we may have an extension of the same. When the government is taxing essential commodities, quote unquote, as a civil society, what are we doing? Does it click on us that besides me being an activist, I am also a taxpayer? Or because you can afford bread, then it does not hurt? If a police comes for you, it hurts so much. I want us to come into this space so that we also have this as our agenda. A fair Kenya also needs a what? A fair administration of taxation. Where others are making noise about the taxation of essential commodities, then all these other things also have to be taken into consideration. Now, we get donations, we get grants, we argue that the grants, the donations are exempted. You get a letter from care and you ask, why am I being taxed? Yet the grants and donations are exempted from tax. But you forget, the moment this donation comes in and leaves your hands and goes out as salary, then the taxman does what? Stands there and says, you have paid, give me the pay as you what? As you earn. The donation comes in, you go and look for a consultant to help you do one or two things. You are paying it out. The taxman says, hey, give me withholding what? Tax. But you're arguing, but the donation is exempt. Do you think the government is contradicting itself? I don't think so. I don't think so. So before we push for the exemption to come into place, is it possible that we can do the bare minimum? Comply. Pay the withholding. Pay the pay as you earn. Do you pay VAT? Or you're exempted? Do we pay VAT? I thought we were exempted. Why do we pay? No exemption. But can you be exempted? We don't know. Maybe, maybe not, yeah? So, as we look at the benefits of what the PBO's section, the second whatever schedule of the PBO's Act, the exemptions that it is providing, my colleague is going to explain under what circumstances do we do what? Qualify for these exemptions. Such that before we start throwing stones, we know, or rather we ask ourselves, are we standing in the right position? For example, you apply for an exemption and you're denied. When we ask for your books, for example, I am not in care, so when I say when we ask, it is not me. When the taxman asks for your books, he realizes you have a donation of 1 million. But wakati anaangalia your expenses, the taxman realizes that 70% of your costs goes to salaries and wages. You have 30% to give to the society. Do you think you qualify for an exemption? Or this does not happen to us? I don't know. Nixon, give us the advantages, and as you do the advantages, give us the downside of it. You have like 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. I'm wearing two hats, but I'll not tell you about the other hat until later. Something comes to mind as civil societies. Somewhere in 2012, there was some clamor for fair payment of taxes in the US. And Apple was made to pay $38 billion. How much is that in Kenya shillings? $38 billion. And it was not, and it wasn't because there was a problem with a specific law that they went against. But the civil society felt that Apple was not paying their fair share of tax. Actually, at the end of the day, they just paid that money to the government because it was believed they were doing tax avoidance. The same thing happened with Starbucks in the UK. They also paid about $8 billion. So that is how powerful the civil society is. And those who are close to Malindi, a few years ago, there's a team that took a Japanese case to the court. How many people remember that case? It's called the Matindi case. And you know what happened? The court was able to nullify the exemptions that were given to the Japanese companies. Of course, there's an appeal and there's a stay order, I think, for the lawyers in the house. You can follow up that case. But that shows you how powerful the civil society is with respect to taxation policies, not speaking about the finance bill of 2024 and 2023 and all those other kind of things. So you guys hold a special position in the society. But again, as my colleague Justus has mentioned, we also need to check our own personal standing with the Revenue Authority so that when we say something is unfair, as we have already taken the legal standpoint and we're okay with that respect. So I'll just quickly take us through the different taxation exemptions that are provided in the second schedule to the Act and bring out what are the salient features. How does the second schedule marry with the exemptions as provided for in the various acts? But before that, I just wanted to give you a quick sneak preview of the various taxes that are there. And I know people usually complain, why is it that in Kenya we have so many taxes? Yeah, I remember the olden days of Nyambane, he will say there's pay as you eat as you pay as you earn as you pay, you know. But it's good so that we put everything into perspective. So one, we have a corporation tax, and I'm setting the stage for the exemptions under the second schedule. So corporation tax is a tax on corporate bodies, just as the name suggests. So it is a tax paid by companies on the profits that they earn. So if a company is in business, at the end of the year, they are required to do their financials according to the International Financial Reporting Standards. Then they compute their taxes from the profits that they have made. The current law, the taxes are chargeable at 30%. So they'll compute their profits and then do 30% of those profits per tax law. And that is what they pay as corporate bodies. Then you have withholding tax. Withholding tax is not just applicable on corporate bodies alone, but the law, those who like reading, and Kenyans and the civil society I know like reading, if you look at Section 10 of the Income Tax Act, it provides for all types of payments that when you are making, the law requires you to withhold a tax. And there are reasons why that law was brought up. One is to ensure that there's a bit of compliance. So as somebody pays you, they are required to withhold a percentage of the payment and remit it to the tax authority. Number two, it might be the only way of taxing certain people, like non-residents. So if you bought, for example, an item which falls within